Doing when that explosion took place, sir?
They were lying, the concrete tunnel was bored through the rock, about 19 feet in diameter, the hole, and they were putting the concrete lining in, which reduced
the debris was right up to the top in about 3 places. And that's what made it so hard bringing the stretchers out and that. I brought the first guy out, and the guy was begging me to take him out. We were going to wait. I went back there to the bridge 3 times where the bodies were, and after the 3rd time, I didn't want to go back there anymore. There were bodies laying all over.
Federal mine inspectors have been here since early this morning, taking notes, asking questions, looking for the cause of the blast.
My crew was setting a form when it happened. I walked off at the end of the form. As I walked off at the end of the form, it just sounded like a big gun went off.
It's filled with the work clothing, the boots and helmets of some of the men who went to Frank Polk's funeral. It is known there is extensive damage inside the tunnel, and the debris and rubble must be cleared away.
It was gas, that it did explode at the eastern end of the tunnel, and that that was the cause of the accident. The whole
The day began like any other for the workers laboring on the raw water tunnel to the Lake Huron water treatment plant. For years, city planners had dreamed of tapping into Lake Huron's abundant fresh drinking water supply. Workers had labored around the clock on the raw water tunnel leading to the Lake Huron treatment plant. The project was 3 weeks away from completion, and the workers looked forward to its end. Though natural disasters in the form of lake storms helped drive up the cost, it was the workers who would ultimately pay the highest price for that dream. Yet, fueled by the knowledge that the tunnel would help fulfill the water needs of the city of Detroit and other parts of southeastern Michigan, the project forged on. The workers were lining the tunnel with concrete. They were working from the intake in towards the shoreline. The work itself had progressed to within 1 mile of completion. Then, at 3:11 p.m., disaster struck. A methane gas explosion tore through the tunnel. In a flash, the lives of 21 workers ended. 22 made it out alive, but of those, 1 would die 10 months later from his injuries. There was much speculation about the cause of that explosion.
What I was told, there's a coffer dam that sits 5 miles out in the lake. That's where they drill down to the tunnel. They promised us faithfully, all the workers, that they would never drill out there as long as there was men in the tunnel. They wasn't scared so much about methane gas as they were going through the tunnel and drowning everybody in there. So they promised us faithfully they would never drill. Well, unfortunately, that day, they was drilling out in the lake in that coffer dam. And unfortunately, the auger with a drill bit broke through, set off a spark in that tunnel, and it blew all to hell.
21-year-old Don Fogel had been working on the project for just 3 weeks. He and his wife Sherry were the parents of a 3-year-old and a 1.5-year-old.
He was, to me, he was awesome. He was strong and just full of life. He was a really good husband.
Raymond Como was the pride of his family, the community, and especially close to his second son, Randy.
Great family man. I think every man that was in the tunnel was a great family man.
because to go down there every day in those conditions for your family tells you quite a bit about these men. They were great guys.
Everybody liked his dad. All the kids in the family were, Uncle Ray was the man, you know. And I know it hurts him. I know it hurts him a lot, but I think this will give him peace too, that he can say, I did this for my dad.
Frank Burns remembers one worker in particular, Frank Polk, who had been in the tunnel for just 2 days.
The one that I remember the worst was Frank Polk. He worked in the office for about 2 years on that project, on the payroll department, and he wanted to make more money for his family. Every time I went up there, he said, Frank, please give me a job. And I said, I can't put you to work, Frank, until I get all my people to work, our union paid up book members. Once I get them to work, I'll be able to put you to work. Well, finally it got so that I couldn't send any more men up to the project because a lot of them wouldn't work in them conditions. So I went up there one day and the superintendent said, will you give Frank Polk a job and get him out of my hair? He's pestering me to death, and you too. So I give Frank a job, if I remember right, on a Thursday, and unfortunately the man got killed on Saturday.
Dr. Elmore Shouty was at the scene.
I had just finished doing my rounds at the hospital. Following that, I got a call that they had an emergency, that there had been a tunnel explosion, and part of our disaster plan at that time was for all physicians to go to the emergency room at the local hospital. We have two, but this was the primary one, called Port Huron General Hospital. All the physicians went, nothing happened. Most of them went back to work, said, call me when you're ready, and there were two of us left. And at that time, they asked that we had someone to go down and assist with the people that are injured, especially to carry pain medication to them, to assist them in evaluating the patients.
The grief and shock resonated throughout this normally quiet community by the lake. Friends and family members gathered at the accident site to await word.
I was at the tunnel site between the tunnel and the hospital for 2 days. I didn't know my husband was killed, so my girlfriend Chris and I went from the tunnel to the hospital to where they were identifying bodies, and we just spent that 2 days back and forth waiting for my husband to be identified, and it was the worst thing that's ever happened in my life. The emotions were, I couldn't believe it. I just did not think, I had my whole future planned with my husband and children, and I just couldn't believe. I mean, how do you believe that that has happened to you? I thought surely he would be one that would survive. And that's what I totally expected, that he would be a survivor.
But as if to add insult to injury, the rescue workers were instructed not to have any contact with the families.
The sheriff's deputies told us specifically, when you get out of there, just walk past everyone. Don't say a word to anybody as to what you've seen or what you know. And so none of us would have been able to talk to her or would have said anything to the people there.
I think that's primarily a hospital decision. The hospital administration feels that they want to be sure the information they give, they want to be sure that they name people correctly, they want to be sure everything is right dotted on the line, to be sure everything's correct, and I can understand that. No one would want to be told that their father or mother or their brother had died and or was severely injured and he had died. I mean, there could easily be some severe mistakes, and I think that's precautionary. Other tragedies that I've been associated with, you have to be very cautious that way.
There was a large room where we were all gathered, and everyone was crying and pacing and very upset. I mean, it was sort of mass confusion, and just the darkest day of our lives. I mean, darkest 2 days, actually. It was 2 days long for me. But there were people that were trying to comfort us. There was a pastor that came down and tried to comfort us, and the Red Cross were there doing what they could, and there were people trying to help, but no one really knew what to do. It was too massive. It was just something that the community, of course, you can't get used to something like that. It's just something that happened, and they all did try to come and help.
What I did may have seemed brave to you. It didn't seem like brave at the time. It just seemed like it was my job. Same as you do your job, I feel comfortable in doing my job, no matter what it takes. If you die in your attempt of what you're doing the right thing, I don't know how else you can die. Death is not so important as the quality of life and what you do for others.
Despite the terror above ground, it paled in comparison to what lay below.
I thought there might have been an explosion and maybe some minor injuries or something, but I never dreamed that you'd face the devastation that we had down there.
It's very similar to being in a rifle barrel, and everything shot right down toward the end of where the opening was. I guess they had all kinds of things that flew up into the air, up the top of the elevator even. That's a couple hundred feet up above.
The explosion ripped through lives much like it had ripped through the tunnel, leaving shattered dreams and unhealable wounds.
9 years old, it was a normal day. Me and my older brother were outside just playing. We didn't really understand what happened until later on in the evening, and then it wasn't real until the following day when they actually told us my father had passed away. And it just, you know, it kind of shattered my dreams.
Frank Polk Jr., just 1.5 years old at the time of the accident, still feels the impact.
For me, I think basically I didn't really know my father. At least I don't remember too many things about him. My two older sisters, they did get to know my father. They knew him for a while. I think it was even worse on my younger sister because she wasn't even born at the time. So I think it was pretty hard on all of us because we had to really adjust. And well, like I said, for a long time, I didn't think I'd ever live past 25. I think after I hit then, I started checking into it more and finding out the answer to some of my own questions that I had.
Grief was delayed for Sherry Darmus.
I would have loved to had someone to talk to at the time. I think it would have helped because I just had to tuck it away. And so in my life, it was as if it happened to another person. I couldn't cry for, I think it was probably 10 or 12 years. And about 17 years later, I was driving by the cemetery, and I actually cried for a long time. And I think my mourning had started 17 years later, after I'd raised my kids.
The explosion left a deep sense of confusion and injustice, especially once a Pennsylvania coal mine rescue effort in 2002 generated an outpouring of community support.
What took place in Pittsburgh, it was on nationally television where I think there was 7 or 11 that was down in that shaft. And fortunately, God bless them, they all survived. And the city of Pittsburgh and the little towns all got together. And they built a monument, $2.3 million. That's unreal. We lost 22 men, and there's not a stick as a marker up there.
Each year on the anniversary of the disaster, the Port Huron Times-Herald runs articles to commemorate the incident. On the 30th anniversary of the disaster, the paper took it a step further.
Memorial is making progress.
Tom Walker is the editorial page editor for the Times-Herald.
The newspaper got involved in a project to go through the history of the event and to kind of update what had happened since that time. Well, the stories that we published were pretty compelling. Told the story of the explosion and how many people lost their lives and the effect it had on the community. And by the time the story concluded, the last point of Mike Connell, the reporter who wrote the story, the last point he made was, you know, 30 years later, there's not a memorial, there's not a plaque, there's no sign to mark the event for history, and there's no tribute to the people who lost their lives, no place to really identify this great turning point. So, as the editorial page editor, I write the editorials, that was my peg that we really need to do something so that another 30 years doesn't go by without this community establishing a permanent memorial or way to remember that terrible tragedy.
The Comos contacted Walker, setting the wheels in motion for the formation of the 1971 Tunnel Explosion Memorial Committee.
We're coming along real well. It's been a long, almost a year and a half now since we've got this going. We finally have laid all the plans. We've got a drawing. The fundraising started. St. Clair County Community Foundation did a mass mailing to their members. And so right now, the funding has started. And as the funds grow, I mean, the larger they grow, the larger this memorial and historical marker at the site will be.
This is all new to us. We never been involved in anything like this, but felt we really needed to do something. And so we went one step at a time, going by people that have called, interested. Ran another article saying that we are starting a committee. Anyone interested, contact us. And we've had a good response. We have a good committee that started. Like I say, we're all fresh, we're all new at it, but I think we have a pretty good group going.
I was so excited. I mean, I had always wondered why there was no memorial. And actually, we had lived in Wisconsin, and my son came back from Wisconsin. We drove by, and I said, "There's where your dad died." And he said, "Well, let's go to the memorial." And I said, "There is none." He said, "I can't believe there's nothing." And no, there wasn't. And when I read that article in the paper, I just got excited. I called Debbie right away.
The group contacted the Detroit Water and Sewerage Department to secure a site for the memorial.
I talked to different people, got a hold of the right man for the Detroit Water Works and Sewage. He met me up on the job site and asked me what we had in mind, and I told him.
I was contacted by Frank Burns, who gave me some more background and asked for participation. So I went to the department administration, explained the situation, that this was a great opportunity to bridge a divide that had been there for 30 years, to work with people towards the construction of a memorial so that these lives that were lost would be remembered and that there would be a focal point of remembrance in the community.
He grabbed the bull by the horns, took it back to his people, and they give us the property.
The goal of the Memorial Committee is to raise enough money to provide a brick-paved memorial walkway and a granite stone monument that contains the names of the 22 victims of the 1971 Port Huron Tunnel explosion. With your help, they will be remembered.